a full-time reader/writer. And 3, I'm a big fan of James Rollins' work. I'm going to read you the official intro. This is what the library provided me, and forgive me, it's brief, and I'll just read it to you. James Rollins is the author of international thrillers that have sold millions and millions of copies and have been translated into more than 40 languages. The latest in his Sigma Force series was just released this week. In the riveting new thriller, Tides of Fire, an international research station in the Coral Sea comes under siege during a global geological disaster that triggers deadly earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. Sigma Force must uncover a secret buried at the heart of our planet in order to stop the world from burning. So that's the official introduction, but let me add my meager voice to that. Actually, let me add a couple other voices first. Lee Child, you may have heard of him, says, "Nobody does it better than James Rollins." The New York Times says, "Rollins is what you might wind up with if you tossed Michael Crichton and Dan Brown into a particle accelerator." And the Wall Street Journal says James Rollins is the dominant figure in this area of fiction. That's pretty high praise from some pretty high sources. My 2 cents, I've read 5 or maybe 6 of his books, and I love them. You're all here probably because you've read some of his work and loved it. This is the latest, and I was provided with an advance copy by the library, so I just finished this on the airplane as I was coming home. Another great adventure. Here's what I want to say about James Rollins' works. His books are an astonishing range of action-adventure, science, history, religion, mythology, romance, suspense, moral issues. The list goes on and on. What he packs in to these pages is really remarkable. And let me just add one more thing. Oh, one of his special talents, if you don't mind me saying so, he is really good at surprising us. And I can't give you examples because they're spoilers by definition, but I was, again, envious as a writer to see how he's able to do a build-up to an obvious conclusion that you find out isn't obvious at all. So I really admire that. I want to remind you all, as he's talking, as we're talking, write your questions on those cards, hold them in the air. Someone from the library will bring them up to us. So that's how we do Q&A here. If you need a pen, please raise your hand and tell somebody, and they'll be happy to provide that. And with that, my meager comments, I want you all to do a very warm Des Moines welcome for our very special guest, James Rollins.
Nope. Yep, there we go. So I want to tell you a little about Joe. I may have sold a few books, but how many awards I read, was it almost twice the number of books you've written, you've gotten awards. We're like 5 books and won like 10 awards. Me?
3 of them from my mother.
This is how many awards I got. So I was jealous when I was reading his bio. I didn't get anything.
This, by the way, is a very generous and kind man. When I walked in tonight, he said, "Oh, Joe, nice to see you." I'd never met him before. I was sure it couldn't be James Rollins because how would he know me? But he really had done his homework and made me feel very fortunate to have him as our guest.
I love talking with other authors and meeting other authors. That's one of the fun things about conferences is you get to, talk crap with other authors. One of the questions, I'm always, and I'm going to beat you to the punch because you're going to ask this if I don't bring this up right now, is one question that someone I have trouble answering is because I've written a few books, people ask me, oh, Jim, of all your books, what book should I start on? What book should I read first? And I'm always like, I got a bunch of books and I like them for different reasons. I don't know. And so I brought this up in a round table of authors, and Lee Child came up with an answer. This is an expression of how brilliant he is. And you gotta pretend that I'm speaking a British accent like Lee does, so it sounds much more intelligent. He goes, oh, Jim, that's an easy question to answer. The book that you want to refer them to is whatever the most expensive book is. Brilliant, brilliant man.
So let's start at the beginning. You're a veterinarian by training and had a veterinary practice. What was the journey that brought you to writing fantasy and suspense thriller novels?
Well, thank you for still referring to me as a veterinarian. As I've talked before, I'm always even on I'm introduced like in an interview in a show or in television, say former veterinarian. No, I do my 36 hours of continuing education. I keep my license current. I still work with a group that traps feral cats and bring them to the shelter. And it's cool to see #1 New York Times bestselling author. Greater thing, I can still neuter a cat in under 30 seconds. But my mom asked me that question, by the way. So what are you doing, Jim? You went through veterinary school. You complained and whined about wanting to go to veterinary school your whole life. From 3rd grade, I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. Got my veterinary degree, practiced for a few years, then something went wrong. I kept reading. I love to read. I was a weird little kid that was always carrying that paperback. I remember when I was in 7th grade, I was carrying a copy of Odessa File, this sort of spy thriller. And it got snatched out of my hand by my 7th grade teacher, who said, "This is too mature for you." Says, is that a bad thing? But I love to read, grew up reading, so but never thought you could make a profession out of writing. You do this, this, and this, you can become a successful veterinarian. You do this, this, and this, and you can fail horribly as a writer. So I went the other path. But again, that's always what I wanted to do. It was just a hobby. I began writing short fiction initially, just for the fun of it. I joined a writing club in Sacramento, and we exchanged work and we critique it. And I still belong to that same critique group. I'll be seeing them day after tomorrow. They've already read the sequel to this book because they see my stuff first. And so it's sort of humbling, to have people critique your work at this point. After so many years, I expect them to bow down when I come in with my new material. They don't. They still tear me to pieces, which is good. But I did that as a hobby, and my only goal was to hopefully one day walk into a bookstore and see my book on a shelf. That's all I wanted. Now I have a bookshelf, which is problematic, but I just wanted the one book. That was my goal. And wrote a bunch of short fiction. Nothing got sold. Rejection after rejection after rejection. So based upon that extreme amount of success, I decided I'm going to write my novel. Wrote my first novel. Got 49 different rejections for that novel. I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't 47. It was 49 different rejections. It was the 50th agent who saw something in that work, who called me at 6 o'clock in the morning, because the East Coast does not know the West Coast is 3 hours earlier, to inform me that she did enjoy my book and she would like to represent it. And I thought, okay, that's cool. I'm sort of excited about that. But at this point, 49 different rejections takes a while. It's not something you get right away. And they're generally form rejection letters. Dear sir, ma'am, we hate your book. Don't submit to us again. Some editor might give you a little pat on the back. Hey Jim, this one character was cool. Too bad the rest of your novel sucks. But trust me, even that little line of encouragement. I like that one character from The Professional in New York. Is like, oh, it feels good. And I did get one of those when I was submitting Subterranean, my first book, and it was again form rejection letter. But on the back, the editor has written me a little note, personal to me, a little bit of encouragement, 3 words: "This is unpublishable." You got to respect that, though. Not only did he reject me, but he took the extra special time to kick me in the nuts. Besides, hooray for you. So I began to be convinced that maybe I'm not a thriller writer. Maybe I should jump into another genre I like to write, which was fantasy. I love to read fantasy stuff. Clearly I'm not the only reason I'm getting rejections is I'm pursuing the wrong genre. Not that I'm a bad writer. I'm just not, aiming towards the right target. So I'm going to switch gears. So during the 49 different rejections, I began working on a fantasy novel. I get that call. Jim, I want to represent your novel. Cool. Jim, what are you working on next? Which is what every agent's going to ask you. They want a workhorse. They don't want to think this is just the one book. Give us more. And again, at this point, I'm like 3/4 of the way through this novel, this fantasy novel. I said, oh, I'm so glad you asked. I'm about 3/4 of the way of this book. I'm very excited about it. It's a cool series. It's all about this fantastic. She goes, nope, stop. It's a fantasy novel? Yeah. I still remember this noise. It haunts me. Stop writing that crap. Give me another thriller. I don't know anybody in the fantasy industry. I don't know the publishers. I don't know the editors. Giving me another thriller. And I'm thinking, I don't want to scare this woman off. So yeah, of course, yes, I will give you another thriller. That was a lie. For several different reasons. Number one, I wasn't convinced that she knew what she was talking about. I have 49 other people saying this is unpublishable, so why am I listening to you? I'm 3/4 of the way done this book. I'm not going to stop it. I already submitted a part of that book, opening chapters, to a contest at the Maui Writers Conference. It's going to be my first writers conference. By the way, if you're going to go to a writers conference, go to the Maui Writers Conference. And I got that call in the spring. The conference is going to be in the fall, beginning of the fall. And so when I got that call, I thought, well, you could have fun over the summer trying to find a home for Subterranean. I am going to finish this fantasy novel over the summer. And over the summer, I was proven right. She would call me on a regular basis. Jim, so-and-so rejected your novel. Jim, another rejection. Jim, another rejection. And now I should be, disappointed, but my reaction was, told you so. It's unpublishable. I've got it written down. I have a written record that this is unpublishable. You're wasting your time. So I end up going to the conference at the end of summer because she has no success all summer long. Cannot sell that book. End of summer, go to the conference. Again, first time I've been to a conference. I don't know proper etiquette in a conference. And this was one of the first years of the Maui Writers Conference. They didn't have all the nuts and bolts worked out because they had sort of a meet and greet tea where participants can commingle with the speakers, authors, people in the field. And it was a big conference, 600 people. So they crammed 600 people into a ballroom in Maui at the end of summer with this requirement. Men must wear jackets. You can wear a Hawaiian shirt, but you have to wear a jacket because it's a literary event. If you have a leather patch right here, you get extra points. So I walk into that room, and I would swear as soon as the doors opened, everybody clustered into little circles and began talking about me. To me, a cocktail party is one of the 9 circles of hell. I do not know how to behave in that environment. Do you just sidle up to a group and go, I like dogs, and just hope for the best? So I'm navigating this very hot, ever increasingly warm ballroom, and I look across the ballroom, and I see somebody that I know. A friend of a friend from Sacramento. Trust me, at this point, we're best friends for the rest of this conference. I'm going to glue myself to this guy's hip for the rest of this conference. I hurry up to him and clap him on the shoulder and give him a little shake. What are you doing here? He turns around and it's Ron Howard, the director. It's Opie. He goes, well, sir, I was invited. And I'm like, oh, I was just checking. Make sure you weren't crashing this party. Then I have to sort of slink away, and now I'm even more nervous. Now I've got to worry about Ron Howard's security coming after me besides doing this whole thing. And so I look across the crowded ballroom, and I see somebody I recognize. And this time I circled him a few times. I checked his name tag, and it was Terry Brooks. Terry Brooks is the international best-selling author of the Shannara series. He pronounces it different. It's Shannara. Look at how it's spelled. It is Shannara. He pronounces it totally weird. Shannara. No, it's not. It's Shannara. I'm sorry. It's not, I'm not even grace that with pronouncing it the way he pronounces it. So I say, Mr. Brooks, I'm a big fan of yours. I read you in junior high. I remember getting a sunburn because I was reading it when the sun was shining, and I was so excited about that scene. I wouldn't get out of the sunlight and got a sunburn. That's how much I loved your writing. And he goes, oh, yeah, whatever, dude. So I'm a big fan of yours too. And I thought, oh my God, I'm being dissed by Terry Brooks, which is sort of cool, but I didn't realize, Terry Brooks was an ass, but okay, cool. Information for the future. And he goes, no, I looked at your name tag, because he's smart. I looked at your name tag, and I was one of the judges at this year's conference. And I really liked your fantasy submission, and I actually had my editor come to this conference specifically to meet you. So based upon that personal introduction from Terry Brooks, I ended up with being offered a 3-book fantasy deal by Del Rey Books. Cool. So of course, the first thing I do, run to my hotel room, call my agent. I think I sold my fantasy series. I don't know anything about how to do contracts, so will you do my contracts for me? She says, sure, I love fantasy. That 15% engenders a lot of love. And she goes, oh, and by the way, right now I have 2 publishers that are currently bidding on Subterranean. So when I flew into Maui, unpublished, flew out of Maui, 2 different genres, 2 different publishers, 2 different pen names. Life got very confusing from there. So, but I didn't stop practicing. I actually worked for another 5 years, still working full time. Then sold my clinic and worked with the corporate group that bought it. Then went from part time to just weekends, and finally stepped away. So now he's not going to answer any more questions or ask any more questions because and your time is up.
But you're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I'm not.
So we share a love of classic science fiction. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is one of my favorite books for 50 years, or God help me, 60 years. Any comments about how your love of those classic books influences your writing today, or does it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I grew up reading these bantam reprints of these old classic pulp novels called Doc Savage.
Oh, sure.
Doc Savage basically was he wasn't a superhero, even though he was called a man of bronze. That eventually they stole a lot of aspects of Doc Savage that became Superman, but he wasn't Superman. He was just an ordinary guy that was just sort of smart and toned his body up and could do incredible things. But he put around him a team of experts in different fields, specialists in different fields that were also very good at shooting things. So when I was writing my first Sigma novels, eventually, there's an old adage that writers are naked on the page. We expose a lot more of ourselves than we think we do. And I thought that was, crap. I don't believe that. No one knows anything about me from reading my books. Then I get this email from some guy goes, hey, Jim, I'm reading your books. Sigma, pretty cool. But you're just ripping off those old Doc Savage novels. You know that, right? I had never told anybody that, but I turned around, I got 181 Doc Savage novels over here. And I was. It basically, Sigma Force is a group of, special forces soldiers that train in different disciplines, and, they're scientists with guns. And I cheated a little because Monk is one of the sidekicks of Doc Savage. So I made a name Monk for my book as a little, tip of the hat. So it definitely influences my writing.
So you according to your website, you did a novelization of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Tell us about the challenges or the differences, or what it was like to try to novelize a work from another format.
It was challenging. First of all, I would never think I would do that. I thought I'd never do novelization. Until, of course, when you get a call from Steven Spielberg, say, will you do your novelization of this? And it's like, no, Steven, I will not. Plus the fact that I'm a huge Indiana Jones fan. And I'll tell you how I'll give you an example of this. When Raiders first came out, I was one of those people that had to see movies like the first day they came out, the first showing ideally. I saw Star Wars, the very first showing, got the May the Force Be With You badge because you were there the first showing. And so knowing that Indiana Raiders was coming out, I wanted to be there the first day. Circle in the calendar, going to be here that first day. Well, they had a sneak preview week before that. They did not tell me that in advance. I had booked a whitewater rafting trip that day. And so I remember just paddling really fast because I wanted to make sure I made that showing. And I did not quite make it. I had to go right from the river to the theater. So I went basically soaking wet to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is actually not a bad way of watching it, by the way. It's to get that 3D effect. I just feel sorry for whoever sat in this chair after me. Like, wow, he really liked that show. So to get that nod to do it, you know, of course I was going to do it. I didn't know what I was getting into. It was a very, if you remember when it came out, there was somebody leaked a little bit of information and you know, all these lawsuits and people got all upset and I had to sign an NDA in blood about, you know, not revealing any secrets. And when I first read the script, I had to go to Lucasfilm studio and they would lock you in a room with the script. Even to go to the bathroom, I had to give the script back. And then I would wash my hands coming back. But then, so they told me, you can't take the script out of this room. And I'm thinking, I've got to go home and write the novelization of this script. You know, I can't take the script home. No, you can't take the script home. You can take as many notes as you want. Can I copy it? I guess you could. So I copied the script by hand and carried it home with me. So that's the weirdness of that whole profession. You know, it makes no sense. I can't take the physical script there, but I can make a handwritten copy and take that with me. But it was a great deal of fun because, you know, there's an old adage, you know, the novel is better than the movie. And that's because generally a book is this long and you have to cut a lot of stuff out and trim it down to become that 90-minute movie or 2-hour movie. And so to reverse engineer that, to go from this and to expand into a novel, I get to add a lot of things that aren't in the movie. So there's a lot of scenes that aren't in the movie. The opening that's in my book is not in the movie. I initially made the mistake of asking permission about different things. Can I do this? No, you cannot. Can I do this? No, I cannot. You can't do that. Okay, I'm just not going to ask anymore. I'm just going to write it, turn it in. And there's a ton of stuff in there that's not in the script and it's, you know, just made out of my own imagination. And except for a couple little notes, they were fine with it. So it was a definitely different animal than just writing from my own imagination.
Seems like the obvious follow-up question, if you and Spielberg are pals now, what about your work? Is there movie versions of it? Is there going to be movie versions of it? If there is already, I apologize that I don't know that, but
well, I don't think there is. I haven't seen it. But the entire Sigma Force universe has been under option. And the good news is last February, they renewed the option, which is the first time somebody's done that, where basically when you get your rights, they're renting your book for a while. They're giving you a chunk of money for X number of months where they can pursue to see if there's anything that they want to do with it. And after about 12 months, they make the decision whether to greenlight it or to continue to do more research or to give the rights back to you. And most of the time, they just give the rights back to you. By a year, if they know what they're going to, whether there's anything they want to do with it. So the fact that they renewed it, I think, is a hopeful sign that we'll see something. And right now, they're on the debating. And let me ask you this: they're debating between feature film versus like a series where one book is covered over the. So how many wants movies? How many wants series? Yeah, I agree with you guys. I do not see how you could boil down Tides of Fire into a 2-hour movie and have it make any sense. Because usually I start fairly grounded in the story, and by the end I'm going to take you somewhere pretty fantastic. It takes me the novel to get you there. To try to get that within like 90 minutes to 2 hours, I just don't think it's going to be hard to pull off. So I definitely prefer to see it done in a serial format.
You've done some co-writing.
Did?
Rebecca Cantrell and Grant Blackwood. So tell us about that, how it came to be and what's your experience in doing that?
Again, I've written 2 books every year. And my problem is that when I get an idea, it gets stuck in my head. I can't get it out of my head. For example, usually when I had to turn in manuscripts for novels that I want to sell, I had to give them a great detailed outline. And by detailed outline, I had to turn in a 20-page synopsis where I lay out everything about that story, every character, every subplot, all had to be laid out. And I didn't like doing that. I would turn that in. She would give me some money, which I like. And then I'd go home and I'd write something entirely different. And this is what the turning point for me was that I did that, turned this whole story. She says, I like that. Woke up one Sunday and thought, what if someone poisoned the communion wafer during a church service and they passed around these poisoned wafers and everybody dies? I like that concept. Has nothing to do with the book I wrote and submitted, but I like it. So I made the mistake of emailing my editor and said, hey, I have this idea. And it was basically like 3 sentences. Poison wafers, this happens, this happens. Bing, send it out there. An hour later, get back from my editor. Write that one instead. They do not get the 20-page outlines anymore. They get 3 sentences from me on what the book's going to be about. I forgot what your question was. I don't remember what we were talking about. Or the co-writing. So that's the way my brain works. If I get an idea, it's stuck in my head. So I got the idea about, I was looking at, over in LA, they have a copy of The Raising of Lazarus done by Rembrandt. And if you look at that, it's a creepy Gothic looking thing, Lazarus is raising from the grave, and Christ is raising his hand over him, calling him back to life. And I'm looking at that, that's really creepy. And I keep coming back to that. There's something about this. I don't know what, there's something here. I don't know what it was. So I kept coming back to it. Eventually, one of the docents realizes something's wrong with this guy. Why does he keep coming back to that painting? So he says, sir, are you going to steal that painting? No, I'm just curious, I'm intrigued by this painting. So we got talking about it, and he says, actually, this is only one of, there's 3 copies of this painting that Rembrandt did. This is not, there's 3 of them. He did 3 versions. And in one of the versions, he says, it's a little more graphic than even this. In one version, you can see blood dripping from Lazarus' mouth. I'm thinking, oh, well, that's clearly Lazarus is a vampire. And that this is Christ is making some pact with this vampire. And that became the seed that began, I get thinking about it. It began building into this whole mythology tied to early Catholicism and vampirism and how there's commonality to that. And I got this idea how the story needed to be told. I tried writing it, and I couldn't quite, it needed to be this sort of Gothic, rich story, and that just wasn't in my wheelhouse. I thought it was not. But I knew Rebecca Cantrell because she was actually one of my students at a writer's retreat in Maui. Eventually returned as now a educator, teaching people to write. And in that same class with Rebecca Cantrell was also Mark Graney, who does the Gray Man series. He was also one of my students in that class. And so, again, I'm reading both of their works, getting the early blurbs for both of their books. And so I'm reading Rebecca's latest book, which is a mystery set between World War I and World War II. And she's really good at, has this sort of Gothic quality to her writing. This is exactly what this story needs. So I called Rebecca and said, Rebecca, I have this idea, and I think, I could bring the science and the history and the weird creatures, but I need this sort of this Gothic quality that you're really good at writing. Would you want to work on a project with me? She goes, what's it about? Vampires. No. You will never get me to write a vampire story. And so I said, no, just let me lay it out. So I sort of laid out the history, the mythology, and she said, and eventually I had her hooked. She said, that is actually pretty cool. So then we began working on that together. And it was, again, a different beast. I'm usually the judge, jury, and execution of my writing, and now it's writing by committee. We would exchange chapters and critique each other's work every Monday. It's a very uncomfortable Monday. And initially, we didn't know how to talk to each other. We were initially a little bit too polite. It was like, Rebecca, I really love this chapter. Don't get me wrong. And, what you've done here, brilliant. But maybe if you just did something like, and eventually got down to, Jim, this chapter sucks, rewrite it. Once we got to that level of efficiency, our writing became very smooth, and we were able to go back and forth, and we ended up writing a trilogy based on that concept.
So I actually had a question in my list about your teaching. I'm curious how you find time to do it, but more importantly, I suppose, why do you do it? Tell me how you got into the teaching side of doing writers' conferences, et cetera.
It's mostly out of an obligation. The only time I really teach writing is at ITW, the International Thriller Writers, which I was sort of one of the founding, I wouldn't say founding, but I was one of the original board members of that group. And and also with the Maui writers, because they basically started my career. So I have a lot of obligation to them, and I like talking about writing, and I wasn't quite sure how to teach initially. Like had all these people that are there for a week, and I have to teach them how to write in a week. I'll just make it up. No, I mean, after a while, you learn. There's an old adage: you can't teach writing. You'll hear that occasionally. You can't teach somebody to write. Yes, you can. There are tools of the craft I can teach you, and I learned it from trial and error. I learned it from reading other books. There are tools I can teach you to become a better writer. I can't teach you to have an imagination or be a storyteller. I think you have to naturally be a storyteller, this innate desire to be somebody that's going to spin tales. But I can then teach you how to spin that tale into its best light. I can do that. And it took me a while to figure out how to teach those tools.
By the way, if teaching it in a week is difficult, one of the people asking questions asked you to do it tonight before you leave. Explain to them, so that might be a bigger challenge. Obviously, some of you is in every character you create, but somebody asked, is there any one character that you identify with more than the others personally?
I always tell people, Gray Pierce is who I wish I was. I'm probably more like Kowalski. To be honest with you, is I think that's why I like Kowalski, is he's probably a little bit more like me than I would like to admit. No author, I think, actually just says, I see that person right there, I'm going to put them in a book exactly the way they are. We make Frankensteins, we borrow from everybody. We seldom just create characters out of smoke and mirrors. Usually they are based on traits that we pick up and pay attention to and incorporate into our characters. So I can't say there's like one person that's in my life that I actually based on that character. So
this is always an interesting question. Somebody asked, do the characters in the story end up at the end of the book the way you planned when you started the book?
For the most part, yes. Again, as I mentioned, I'm not a big outliner, but being plot driven, I need to know the beginning and the end, and I need to know some tent poles that are going to hold up the story. Because eventually we have to get to where that book's going to land. But I don't know how A connects to B connects to C. To me, that's one of the joys of writing, is that discovery, that unknown. Some writers, have to know that. They're uncomfortable writing into the unknown. That's where I prefer to be. I love to paint my characters into a jam, into a corner that I'll go, oh, that's cool. I have no idea how they're going to get out of it. But it's such a cool situation. If I don't know how they're getting out of it, none of you are going to either. So then I've got to figure out how to get them out of that, and that's the challenging part. But so again, you only discover that during the writing process. But in regards to changing characters, yeah, sometimes characters come onto the scene that I didn't think were going to be that important, that become more important. Kowalski first appeared in Ice Hunt as a supporting character. Years later, I kept thinking about Kowalski, and so I recruited him to Sigma. Doesn't belong in Sigma. Sigma is these special forces soldiers that have retrained in scientific disciplines. There are these, special aptitudes and skills. And then there's Kowalski. Likes to blow things up. That's a skill. Not particularly bright. I'm recruiting him because I like him. So there is some of that. Some of it's regimented, but I always leave some room for some changes of the characters, or somebody come up to the front that I wasn't expecting to come up to the front.
So a couple of people have noted, as I did in the intro, about how you get into the physics, geology, all these scientific principles, et cetera. And it's been asked a couple different ways in these questions about how you do your research, or are there particular experts that you've aligned with to draw on their expertise? How do you go about that?
If you read my books, there's the what's true, what's not section at the end of the books, where I sort of pull aside the curtain and explain exactly where this came from and how much is real. I started doing that basically because of two reasons. Number one is I would get that question asked a lot in email. Jim, is this true? Jim, where did that come from? Jim, is that true? And rather than having to answer the same question over and over and over again, I would just I'm going to put it in the back of the book. I also do it because of a 1-star Amazon review, which I've gotten. This isn't the only one I've gotten, by the way. And the guy was saying, like, Jim, I was really just enjoying your story. It was really great. And I'm like, why is that a 1-star review? Except I got to this one part of your story, and it was so outlandish. It was so jumping the shark crazy. It threw me out of the story. And I'm thinking, that part of the story is factual and true. But I can't reach through the internet and grab him and shake him. So I thought, I'm going to do this, so that if you ever wonder, that sounds outlandish, just read the end. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's based on something.
Here's a question you have to read for yourself, the first line of this slip.
How do you pronounce Seishan? Did you put that question in there? We just had a conversation about that. That's probably the most common question I get asked is, how do you pronounce it? And that's the way I pronounce it. It's like the Shannara, and however he pronounces it, which the word I will not use. However you pronounce her name is the correct way. It's just the way I pronounce it in my head.
Somebody here has asked about your pets, dogs, whatever. You want to give a quick word about animals you have at home?
At this point, I've gone through a bunch of different animals. Right now, I lost Duncan. People probably know it was a tragic loss of one of my golden retrievers, and I still have Echo. Rescued a new guy named Charlie out of a Petco adoption event. It was one of those point-of-purchase impulse buys. I went just to get more food for my dog, and it's like, you are coming home with me. So Charlie he's a rascal. He's a good boy. Crazy.
We often get asked who our favorite authors are, but this is kind of an interesting twist on that. What is your favorite underrated book?
Favorite underrated book? I don't know if this is underrated necessarily, but I just sort of promoted this just recently on social media, because the guy gave me a blurb, so of course I'm going to promote him. Is Steve Alton is the author of the book Meg, that became the movie Meg, and now he wrote the sequel, Meg the Trench, which is out right now. So I've known Steve since the beginning of his career. We've known each other a while. I actually use his book as a teaching tool, because I always tell people, if you want to know what the definition of high concept is, the definition of high concept is, can you describe your story in under 25 words? If you can describe your plot and story in 25 words, you have a high concept. Well, Steve never published anything, wrote just a partial part of his novel. Usually, as a first author, you have to write your entire book. They're not going to accept just a few chapters. He just wrote a few chapters, but he had the best description of it was just 2 words, not 25, 2 words. Jurassic Shark. It says everything about his book. It's playing off Jurassic Park, so you're going to get that Jurassic Parkish feel, but it's also got that Jaws feel. So in 2 words, he describes his entire book, and ended up selling it for $1 million, sold the film rights right off the bat, hadn't written the book yet. That's how strong it is to have just those 2 words. But a lot of people have read Meg, because when it came out, it had a middling success, but it's a great story. It's a great read.
This is a very interesting question. Well, let me just read you the way they wrote it. What is your writing kryptonite?
Procrastination. No doubt about it. There's always something else to do. And so it took me a while to figure out how to fit writing in my life as a veterinarian. And I think any writer, you have to eventually figure, where's writing fitting in my life? I had a busy clinic, and I had to put the business hat and the veterinary hat, and I had 23 employees. How am I fitting this hobby of writing in this busy life, especially when it came to writing a novel? And what my answer to that procrastination thing was, I need to get more structured. I need to make a commitment to myself. And so what I was going to do, I was going to write 3 pages every day. That was my commitment. I'm going to write 3 pages. No, I'm not. I'm going to write 3 double-spaced pages. So basically, page and a half. Okay, not every day. 5 out of 7 days of the week, I'm going to write 3 double-spaced pages. So it took me a while to eventually I realized, okay, I could do a page and a half, 5 out of 7 days of the week and still not feel like I'm pulling my hair out. So that was my solution to getting around the kryptonite, is by saying, I'm going to just do this. The other answer to my kryptonite is a little Post-it note. Those 3.5 pages or 3 pages double space, they don't have to be good. I just have to put them onto paper. I have a note. Today, I give myself permission to write crap. I use a different word than crap, but we will say crap right now. Because you have to sort of let that, like, I just had to get words on paper, and I found that even when I don't feel like writing, I want to procrastinate, if I can just write those pages just to get it done so I can go play. That's what most of my way around the kryptonite is by having a little bit of structure, but also at the same time being loose with that structure, allowing myself permission to not necessarily have to be a perfect 3.5 page or 3 double space pages, just put words on paper.
So this is a question I've never been asked, so I'll be interested to know if you've ever been asked it, but I find it, well, anyway, do you find that the style and pace of successful thriller genre is evolving with the social evolution?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you look at what was thrillers in the past, whether it's Doc Savage in the past, and you look at James Patterson today, the writing has become even more staccato paced. The short chapters, the punchy chapters, where before they were longer, just more volume. There's more words on the page. Now everything is much leaner and meaner. So that basically, I don't know if it's a matter of our attention span has gotten shorter over time, that we just expect to have stories told to us at a more rapid pace. So I think it has evolved over a period of time. So I'm just going to go to like 1 word a page.
I'm looking at the library staff because I want to make sure that we're being respectful of whatever time we're supposed to do. I'm not exactly sure, maybe I just haven't read enough of your books, so forgive me for that, but I have read 5 or 6 and loved them. But this says, any more half books? Is that the term they're asking about? Any more half books in the future?
Oh, short stories, novellas, maybe. Is that, who wrote that? Who asked that? Oh, gotcha. So that was a common sort of almost a marketing thing, is that a way of promoting a new release where you do sort of like a preview chapter that leads into the book, like a little special short story that has a little adventure, but it sort of ends where the new story is going to pick up. So those are always torture for me, to be honest with you. And to me, it's almost more painful to write a short story than it is to write the entire novel, because there's an old adage, writing a novel is hard. Writing a short story is harder. Writing a poem is impossible, because as you narrow that down smaller and smaller, it becomes harder and harder to pull off well. So for me, I feel constricted by the short story format, and I think that's why I never showed. This is my excuse. I'm sure this is why I never showed a short story, was that it just wasn't my right model. And why I mentioned just before about how I went from writing short fiction, then I said I'm going to write my novel. There was a pivotal point that occurred. I submitted a short story to a fantasy magazine by Marion Zimmer Bradley. She's passed away, but Marion Zimmer Bradley wrote the Mists of Avalon series. And she wrote me a handwritten note back. I have this handwritten note from Marion Zimmer Bradley basically saying, Jim, your novel sucks. I mean, short story sucks. No, basically she says, I can see that you can write, Jim. You have the talents to be a writer. But innately, from reading your short story, I don't think you're a short story writer. I think you're a novel writer. You need to not submit any more short story. And maybe she's just like, tell him something so he stops sending us these crappy short stories. Just tell him he's a novel writer and let him go away for a while. But of course, that can't possibly be what she was doing. And so that was she was right. I prefer to read novels more than I prefer to read short stories. Are work. You got to figure out who the characters are, what's going on, what's the plot's going on, and it's over. Like, why did I put that much effort in? I want a story, and if there's like multi-volumes in it, all the better. So I realized, that's what I love to read. Maybe that's what I should be writing, rather than trying to, cobble myself into a shoe that doesn't quite fit me.
So I'm just speculating, maybe this is a Cardinals fan, but someone asked why you left the St. Louis area.
Again, my parents moved away. That was this first year of, again, I think they were trying to avoid me. And I went to the University of Missouri, Columbia. 1 month I'm in school. 1 month. I get into school and I got a good veterinary school. I'm going to stay here. Parents go, we're moving to the West Coast. I thought, okay, well, whatever. I'm going to stay here because I like the school and I'm committed. And so I stayed stayed in my next 6 years going to school here, graduated, got my veterinary degree, moved out to Sacramento because during my summer breaks I was working with a veterinary out there, and he offered me a job when I graduated. So I went out there and helped him with his practice. 1 month after I moved there, we're moving back to Chicago. What are you people doing? So eventually they came to Sacramento, but I lied. I told them, I'm moving out of Sacramento. They go, good, we can go back.
Have your explorations of these scientific areas and some of these, scientific areas, have they sparked interest from outside parties like the government? We've talked to other thriller writers who said when they got into this, Homeland Security came calling and, picked their brains about this and that. Have you had any of that experience?
Not that I know of. But there's this little clicking that occurs on my phone all the time. What is that? But I mean, it's actually it's sort of cool, because I was just speaking to somebody at an event yesterday, and he was saying that he read my books and he liked Amazonia, and it has prions on there, and he was in school, so he was so inspired by Amazonia that he did his whole doctoral thesis paper on prions because he read Amazonia. So that's pretty cool to have somebody to have your books have that type of effect on people. So.
The last thing I had on my list, I think, I read that you love to travel. I know whether you love it or not, you travel a lot. How many countries have you been to? Do you still enjoy it? Tell us a little about your travel experience.
I don't know how many countries I've been to. I've been to 6 of the 7 continents. I've never been to Antarctica, so that's one of the bucket list thing. I just want to touch it. There, okay. All 7 covered one of these years. So I've not been there yet. Of course, my first book, Subterranean, takes place in Antarctica, but never been there. You travel for your research, like you said, you were going to do a book in Ireland, so you flew to Ireland to work on your next book with Tony Harriton. And I don't do that often. I mean, occasionally I will, but Steve Barry does that all the time, I think, to write it off. He'll go into, someplace and he'll really dig deep into stuff, and I've traveled with him. It's like, let's go eat pasta. No, I must study this ancient ruin over here. All right, I'm eating pasta. And, but what I do when I travel, I absorb as much as I can. Take a bunch of pictures, I journal. I also like to, this is a fun thing to do, by the way, and I'd encourage you to do it. When you're traveling, just walk to somebody in a small town and just whisper to them, tell me a secret that nobody knows about your place. And they will tell you some astounding stories. I don't know, it's the anonymity. They don't know who you are, so they can spill the guts and they can gossip about the person down the street. And they're going to tell you the most nasty, ribald, horrible, intriguing stories. I'll use this for one example. Was in northern Spain. Again, was not planning on doing research, was in northern Spain traveling for the fun of it. In a little village. And there's a woman selling flowers. She's an old woman. But she knows everything about this town for sure. So I go up to her, tell me something that nobody knows about your town. She goes, okay. She goes, come with me. She leads me. She's going to mug me. She's probably going to kill me. She goes, look at that door over there. And it's this old wooden door. It's got some weird carvings in it. Just see that symbol that's carved in that door. And it's just got a cross and this other weird thing sort of tied and twisted around it. And she goes, that's the mark of the crucibellum. I'm going, cool. I have no idea what that is. She goes, many people think the Spanish Inquisition ended. It never did here in northern Spain. There are sects that still hunt for witches up here. And that's their mark. That's a witch hunter's mark. That became my book, Crucible, which is about the group of a sect that survived the Spanish Inquisition that is hunting women, in this case, women that are working with code, which is magic to them. And so that begins that. So that's where that whole concept came from. So I talked to that old woman at a flower shop, and she told me about this door on the wall. That became an entire novel. So that's where I get my inspiration when it comes to travel. Not necessarily I'm going to get every detail correct. I can do that on the internet or go on Google Earth. You don't have to travel to write some authentic. I've never been to the country of Oman, where most of Sandstorm takes place, the prequel to the Sigma Force universe. I'd like to basically just find people that will give me information. I found somebody that was selling goods out of Oman, had a little souk, and I said, hey, your goods are cool, I'll order a bunch of stuff, but will you be my boots on the ground and tell me all about your town and your city and your history? He goes, well, I guess, but are you going to be derogatory towards our country? I said, well, no, it's, my books are basically about the history, and it's, trying to bring some pageantry to the country. He says, okay, well, then I'll do that. And so we were exchanging for a while, for like 3 or 4 months. I had questions, he would answer them, and then eventually I get in the mail, it's out of the blue, this beautifully engraved, I still have it, this beautifully engraved little card. It's engraved, it's like gilded with gold and probably encrusted with rubies, who knows what dust is in there. But it's basically the Sultan of Oman inviting me to his country to have a royal tour of his country, because he found out that I was going to write about his country, and it was going to be flattering. So cool, well, I'm going to have a free trip to Oman. Then 911 happened, and then I got a little note, maybe not right now. So I never got to Oman. But people that have read my book that have been to Oman have asked me, well, when did you go? What years were you there? Because I remember that shop that you're talking about right in that corner. I bought stuff from that shop. Well, the only reason I know that shop was there, this guy told me that shop was there.
It never occurred to me to tell the president of Ireland I was coming. Maybe I could have got a free trip.
That's what you got to do.
Well, before we let you go, I'd like to end by asking you what we haven't asked you. Are there anything you want to tell us that didn't come up in the questions that you would like to leave with us?
I'm going to tell you where this book came from. Because again, the common question is, where do you get your ideas from? Don't ask any author that. Don't ask him that. Don't ask me that. Don't ask Lee Child that. We don't know, by the way. And I'll tell you this one example of how a little bit, when Subterranean was just about to come out, and I didn't know how to do a book talk like this, so I had attended a few talks, but I just was there. Didn't pay attention. I just was there to get my book signed. But I thought, well, I'm going to study how this author does this. Figure out how to do a book signing. And that question came up. I'm not going to use her name, but if you know the alphabet and you'd like to read mysteries, you might guess who was one speaking up front. Passed away, unfortunately, but the question came up, Sue, unknown author, where do you get your ideas from? And she was very eloquent. Her answer was, the inspiration and where it comes from. And I'm like, I don't do any of that. So I went up front and got my book signed. Said, I was really inspired by your talk, and where you get your ideas from. And I've got a book coming out in a year, and I'm so excited about it. And she goes, wait. You got a book coming out? Yeah, it's coming out from HarperCollins in like 8 months from now. And she goes, I don't know where I got my ideas from. I just make it up. You need an answer to that question, because every single time at a book signing, they're going to ask you, where did you get your idea for that book from? Make something up. They don't know. But I'm going to tell you the truth where this came from. So this is basically a big sort of I could describe this as a disaster novel, or disaster movie in novel format. There's volcanic eruptions, there's tsunamis that swamp these coastlines, there's huge earthquakes, and that's in like the first chapter. Then things pick up from there. But the inspiration for this goes back again to the past. Is I remember when I was a kid, I went and saw a film starring Maximilian Schell and the young Brian Keith in a movie called Krakatoa East of Java, which dramatizes the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa. Very dramatic and earthquakes, tsunamis, disaster, but it's sort of stuck in my head. It's one of the movies I just, Bridge over River Kwai, Krakatoa, certain things just born free, certain things just sort of stick with you, and this is one of them. And so I always wanted to try to do a novel version of that. Can I capture that in a book format? And so that became sort of the impetus for trying to do this novel. There's a lot of weird stuff in this book. There's you're going to learn where earthquakes come from. You're going to learn about the fact that we're all about to die. You're going to learn about are octopuses from space? What are aliens doing in a James Rollins novel? There's everything in this book, and there's a kitchen sink in there somewhere at the back. But I hope you enjoy it. So that's Sides of Fire.
Well, let me just conclude by saying it's a great book. It's for sale over here. I hope you'll stick around and buy it, have him sign it for you. And on behalf of all our attendees and the public library, thank you so very, very much for your
Appreciate it very much.
It's been great.
So we have this little giveaway. They made these little lenticular postcards where you rotate them. You can see, one thing goes this way. So it's a little freebie. If you buy the book, you get a free, lenticular bookmarky postcardy thing.